The air in the cold, sterile corridor felt thick with tension, a strange chill crawling up the spine of the young assassin. She had been trained for this, trained to feel no emotion, no hesitation, just the cold precision of a weapon. A weapon for hire. And today her target was none other than Victor Renner, a man who had once been hailed as a hero, but now a criminal in the eyes of the ones who had once praised him. Her mission was clear: eliminate him. It was the only directive she had ever known. There was no room for questions or doubt. Her superiors had given her a goal, and she was to accomplish it, no matter the cost. She had trained for years, spent hours perfecting every deadly move, every step, every strike. She had never failed a mission before, and she was determined to make sure this one wouldn't be her first. But as she walked down the dimly lit hallway of the hidden base, something gnawed at her. It wasn't fear, no, she had no place for fear. It was something else, something foreign. There was a strange pull in the air, something she couldn't quite place, like a force whispering in her ear, telling her that this mission was different from all the others. She shook her head, trying to rid herself of the distraction. Focus, she told herself. Focus on the mission. The target was a man who had betrayed the cause he once believed in, a man whose ideals had crumbled under the weight of ambition. His name had once been revered, but now it was marked with disdain. It was easy to convince herself that he deserved to die, but as she moved forward, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than she understood. Victor Renner wasn't just another job. She could feel it deep in her bones. She reached the door to his room, her hand hovering over the cold metal handle. Her pulse quickened and her breathing became shallow, but not from fear. There was a strange curiosity stirring within her. What kind of man was he? Why was he once so revered? And why had he fallen from grace? The thought flickered through her mind, but she quickly pushed it aside. She couldn't afford to think too much. She had been trained to kill, and that's what she was here to do. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and she slipped inside, her movements silent, like a shadow. There he was, Victor Renner. He stood near the window, looking out at the distant stars, his silhouette barely visible against the cold glow of the planet outside. His figure was imposing, his broad shoulders and strong build, undeniable even, from behind. The assassin took a deep breath, her hand resting on the hilt of the sleek, deadly blade hidden beneath her jacket. She had done this 1,000 times before, stalked her prey, watched their every move, learned their weaknesses. But this time was different. Something in her instincts told her that this man wasn't just another target. He wasn't just another nameless face that needed to be erased from the galaxy. She approached silently, the weight of her steps absorbed by the soft metallic floor. But just as she drew near, a voice broke the silence. "You're here for me, aren't you?" Her heart skipped a beat. How had he known? He hadn't even turned to face her yet, but it was as if he had felt her presence the moment she stepped into the room. It was a chilling thought. This man, this supposed traitor, had an awareness about him that went beyond normal human perception. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Enough for him to hear the sound of her breath catching in her throat. "You've been following me, haven't you?" he continued, his voice calm, almost too calm. "I'm not surprised. You're not the first to come for me, and you won't be the last." Her grip tightened around the hilt of the blade. He was too calm, too composed. It unnerved her, but she couldn't afford to show weakness. She was here to finish the job. Victor Renner finally turned to face her. His eyes, sharp and calculating, met hers, and for the briefest moment she saw something she hadn't expected. There was no fear in his eyes. There was no anger, no resentment. Just a strange understanding. "You're a killer," he said softly, almost as if he were acknowledging her. "And yet you hesitate. Why?" The question hit her like a slap. She hadn't even realized it. But he was right. She was hesitating. Why? She had been trained for this, groomed to be the perfect assassin, yet here she was, frozen in place. The cow. Assassin couldn't answer. She didn't have an answer. She had only known one thing her entire life: kill and move on. But now, standing here in front of a man she was supposed to kill, she was suddenly unsure of everything she had been taught. She took a step back, unwilling to admit the truth even to herself. Why was she hesitating? And that's when it happened. Victor Renner moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. His calmness was unnerving, but there was something else in his gaze. A quiet sadness, a hidden story. "I was once like you," he said, his voice now softer, more personal. "Trained to kill, trained to follow orders without question. But one day I realized something. We don't have to live this way. We don't have to be slaves to the past." His words hit her harder than any physical strike could. She wanted to believe him, but she couldn't. She had been taught that people like him didn't deserve mercy. Yet here he was, speaking as if he were someone who could be saved. "Are you going to kill me, or are you going to listen?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper now. For the first time, she wasn't sure. What was she supposed to do? The room seemed to close in around her, the silence stretching between them, heavy with tension. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. Something she couldn't explain, but something that would change everything. The silence that hung in the room felt like a heavy weight, pressing down on both of them. Victor Renner's words lingered in the assassin's mind, a question that would not leave her. "Are you going to kill me, or are you going to listen?" For a moment she stood frozen, uncertain of what to do. Everything she had been trained for told her to strike, to end him. But the calmness in his voice, the weight of his gaze, created a turmoil within her that she couldn't easily silence. She had never encountered this before, someone who seemed to understand her more than anyone ever had. Her fingers trembled slightly, and her grip on the blade faltered. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a simple mission. There was something about Victor that unsettled her, something she couldn't quite place. The assassin was always certain of her path, always knowing what to do. But now she felt lost. Victor's eyes never left hers, his expression a mixture of resignation and hope. He knew what she was capable of. He had likely seen others like her before, trained assassins sent to kill without mercy. But unlike the others, he didn't fear her. In fact, he seemed almost hopeful, and that hope, that quiet defiance, made her heart race faster than it ever had before. Why am I hesitating? She had been trained to strike without emotion, to sever the connection between her mission and her humanity. But now here she was, caught in a web of conflicting emotions. Her mind screamed at her to act, to finish the mission before it was too late. But then, as if sensing her internal struggle, Victor took a step closer. His movements were calm, slow, almost deliberate. He wasn't trying to provoke her, wasn't trying to make her feel threatened. Instead, he moved as if he were trying to connect with her, to bridge the gap between them that felt so vast. "Do you know what it feels like to be trained for something your entire life?" he asked softly. "To be told that you have no other purpose than to kill? That there's nothing else for you but violence?" His words cut through her like a sharp blade. For a brief moment she thought of the years she had spent in training, her entire existence defined by her deadly purpose. She had been raised for one thing, one goal: to kill. And now, for the first time in her life, she questioned that purpose. She was still reeling from his words when he made his move. It happened so quickly she barely had time to react. Victor lunged forward with a speed and force that took her by surprise, knocking the blade from her hand. The assassin's training kicked in instinctively. She rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding a punch aimed at her ribs. But Victor was relentless. His strikes were fast, calculated, each movement designed to neutralize her. Her heart pounded in her chest as she scrambled to regain her footing. The fight was no longer about killing him. It had become about survival. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to fight back, and she certainly hadn't expected him to be so skilled. She dodged another punch, but this time, he caught her by the arm, twisting it behind her back. Pain shot through her shoulder as she tried to break free, but he was too strong. Her mind raced. If I don't stop him, he'll overpower me. I can't afford to lose. With a burst of adrenaline, the assassin spun around, using her free arm to land a sharp elbow to Victor's side. He staggered back, momentarily thrown off balance, but she didn't have time to capitalize on the opportunity. Victor's eyes were wild now, but not with anger. There was something else there, something deep. It was as if he wasn't fighting her out of hate, but out of necessity. And that confused her even more. The fight raged on, but it was clear neither of them had the upper hand. Victor's training was different from hers, more instinctual, more human. She could feel the raw power in his movements, but they weren't guided by the precision she was accustomed to. His punches were unpredictable, desperate even, as if he was fighting not to win, but to stop her from doing something irreversible. But then, as she attempted another strike, something went wrong. She misjudged his movement. He ducked, and her foot caught on the edge of the metallic floor. She lost her balance and fell forward. In an instant, Victor was on top of her, his hand gripping her throat. For a moment, everything went silent. She could feel her pulse racing, the pounding of her heart in her ears. Her body screamed in protest, but her mind was strangely calm. This wasn't how she was supposed to die. Not like this, not at his hands. But as the pressure on her throat tightened, something unexpected happened. Victor's grip loosened. His eyes flickered with a sudden realization, and he pulled away from her, looking down at her with a mixture of regret and guilt. She gasped for air, her lungs burning as she tried to catch her breath. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She had been on the verge of losing her life, and yet he had let her go. Victor stood up, his face a mask of conflict. The assassin couldn't understand it. Why did he stop? Why didn't he finish it? "I'm not your enemy," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I never was." She didn't know what to say. Her heart was still racing, her body aching from the fight. But his words, his actions shook her to the core. This man who had once been a hero, who had been betrayed, had spared her life. For the first time, she didn't know what to think. What kind of man is he? Her wound throbbed, but it wasn't the only thing that hurt. Something deeper within her had shifted. She had never been in a situation like this before, and she was starting to realize that she was no longer just the assassin. Something was happening to her. She didn't know what it was, but she could feel it. A change, a transformation. Victor stepped back, allowing her to sit up. He extended a hand, but this time she hesitated. The sharp sting of pain in her side brought the assassin back to reality. She blinked against the haze clouding her vision, only to find herself resting against a cold metallic wall. The world around her seemed to spin as she tried to gather her bearings, her hand instinctively pressing against the wound on her side. She felt weak, vulnerable, feelings she hadn't allowed herself to experience in years. Victor's voice broke through the fog. "You're going to bleed out if we don't do something." His tone was calm, but there was an urgency behind it. The assassin looked up at him, still unsure what to make of the man who had once been her target. He was crouched beside her, his dark eyes full of something she hadn't expected. Concern. It was an emotion she hadn't seen in a long time, especially not from someone like him. She had been trained to view everyone as a threat, but in this moment she wasn't sure if he was the enemy or her unlikely ally. Victor didn't wait for a response. He quickly pulled off his jacket and tore a strip of it. "This might sting," he muttered as he applied pressure to the wound, his hand surprisingly gentle despite the urgency of the situation. The assassin flinched, but she didn't pull away. His touch was soothing in a way she hadn't expected. She was no stranger to pain, hadn't she endured it all her life? Yet, something about the tenderness in his actions made her question everything she thought she knew about the world. "You're not what I was trained to expect," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the first time she had spoken, in a way that wasn't part of a mission. She didn't even know why she had said it. Perhaps it was the blood loss, or perhaps it was the strange feeling of vulnerability that had taken over her. Victor paused, his hands stilling for a moment, as if processing her words. "I've been told that a lot," he said, his voice soft but steady. But not everyone fits into the boxes we put them in. Not everyone is what they seem. The assassin wanted to argue. She wanted to say that he was just another target, just another part of the mission. But as she met his gaze, she couldn't find the words. For the first time, she wasn't sure who the enemy really was. She closed her eyes briefly, trying to steady herself. "I was sent to kill you," she said, her voice low. "That was my only purpose. Everything I've done, it's all been for this moment. And now, I don't know anymore." Victor didn't respond immediately. He finished tying the makeshift bandage around her side, and then he leaned back slightly, looking at her with a mixture of understanding and something else. Something that might have been compassion. "You're more than your training," he said, his voice quieter now. "And you don't have to keep being the person they want you to be." The words were like a blow to her chest. They made her feel exposed. But for some reason she didn't want to push him away. She didn't want to run as she had always done in the past. There was something in his eyes, something that pulled her in, that made her want to listen. "You can't trust me," she said, but it sounded more like a plea than a statement. She didn't know why she was even saying it. She had been trained to trust no one, especially not someone like him, someone who had once been her enemy. Victor sighed, a sound of weariness mixed with something else, something that could have been regret. "I'm not asking you to trust me," he said softly. "I'm just asking you to see me for who I am. I'm not the monster they painted me to be." The assassin let his words hang in the air as she let the weight of his statement settle over her. Could she really trust him? Could she really believe that he wasn't the monster she had been taught to view him as? A low rumble echoed through the corridor, and the assassin's instincts kicked in. She immediately stood up, pushing herself off the wall despite the pain. "We're not safe here," she said, her voice sharp. She could hear the distant sounds of footsteps and low voices, the unmistakable sound of enemies approaching. Victor stood up with her, instantly on alert. His expression hardened, his eyes flicking to the shadows. "We need to move," he said, his voice full of command. The assassin didn't hesitate. She grabbed her blade from where it had been discarded earlier and nodded. Victor moved quickly, scanning their surroundings. The assassin followed his lead, both of them knowing they were no longer just fighting for survival. There was more at stake now. The world around them felt different, as if the lines between right and wrong, between enemy and ally, were shifting in ways they couldn't fully understand. "You know what they're capable of," Victor said as they moved quickly through the hallways. "They'll stop at nothing to make sure you finish the mission, but we can't just keep running from them. We need to make a stand." The assassin nodded, understanding his words even if she wasn't fully sure of his plan. The enemies pursuing them weren't just ordinary soldiers. They were trained just like her. But she had something they didn't: doubt, and the knowledge that her mission wasn't as clear-cut as it had once seemed. They reached a small room at the end of the hall, barricading themselves inside. The sound of footsteps grew louder, but they knew they couldn't just sit back and wait. They had to fight. Victor moved with the calm precision of someone who had seen countless battles, and for the first time, the assassin felt like she wasn't alone. For the first time, the cold isolation of her life as an assassin seemed to fade into the background. She wasn't just a weapon anymore. She wasn't just someone trained to kill. As they prepared for the incoming threat, the assassin felt something stir within her. Maybe she wasn't alone. Maybe, just maybe, she had found someone who could show her what it meant to fight for something other than survival. The doors to the room slammed open, and the two of them moved as one, ready to face whatever came next. The conflict wasn't just physical anymore. It was something deeper, a battle within, between the assassin she had always been and the person she was starting to become. The silence was deafening in the small, dimly lit room, the only sound being the faint hum of the distant machinery. The doors had been sealed shut, and the only way out now was through a wave of armed guards that were closing in on them. The assassin's breathing was shallow, her body still aching from the fight earlier, but her mind was sharper than ever. Victor stood next to her, his eyes scanning the monitors in front of them, calculating their next move. The two of them had made it this far, but they both knew it was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed. There was no escape. The enemy was relentless. The assassin's hand instinctively moved to the wound on her side, a reminder of how close she had come to death just hours earlier. She glanced at Victor, the man she had been sent to kill, the man who had somehow become her ally, and something inside her twisted. She still didn't know what to think of him. She had been trained to end his life, to consider him the enemy, but the lines were no longer clear. Victor, sensing her inner turmoil, turned to face her. His expression was grim but understanding. "They're coming for us," he said, his voice steady. "But we can't run forever. If we're going to make it out of this, we have to make a stand. Together." The words hit her harder than she expected. Together. The concept was foreign to her. She had never had anyone to stand beside her. She had always worked alone, always relied on herself to survive. But now, standing here with him, she felt the weight of the choice she had to make. She had a choice. She could continue with the mission. She could finish what she had started, the only purpose she had ever known. She could kill him like she was trained to do, and escape this nightmare. It would be the easier path, the one she had been taught to follow her entire life. But as she looked at Victor, something in her heart rebelled against that option. He wasn't the monster they had told her he was. He wasn't her enemy. Or she could choose the harder path. She could stand with him, fight side by side, and help him survive. But that meant defying everything she had ever known. It meant betraying her training, her masters, and everything she had been taught to believe. The room seemed to close in on her as the sounds of footsteps grew louder, the guards drawing closer. She had no time left to think. The time for choosing had arrived. Victor looked at her, his expression softening. "I'm not asking you to trust me," he said quietly. "I'm asking you to trust yourself. You don't have to be what they made you. You have the power to choose your own path." The assassin's heart raced. She could hear her breathing growing louder, a frantic rhythm that echoed in her ears. She had always known her purpose. She had always known her place in this cold, merciless world. But now, faced with this decision, the world felt different. The line between right and wrong was blurry, and the choice was hers to make. She took a step toward Victor, the weight of her decision settling over her like a heavy cloak. He hadn't made her a promise. He hadn't made her any guarantees. But something in his eyes, something in the way he had treated her with kindness, made her believe that there was more to life than just following orders. The door suddenly burst open and armed guards flooded into the room, weapons raised. The assassin didn't hesitate. Her instincts took over, her body moving before her mind could catch up. With a swift motion, she grabbed a nearby gun and in one fluid motion fired at the nearest guard. The shot rang out, echoing through the room. Victor was right behind her, moving with the same deadly precision, his combat skills in perfect sync with hers. Together they took down the guards one by one, each movement seamless, each action coordinated. They were a team now. For the first time, she wasn't alone. She wasn't just an assassin. She was part of something bigger than herself. As the last guard fell, the two of them stood in the center of the room, panting, their bodies bruised and battered from the fight. But they had survived. They had made it through together. The assassin looked at Victor, her heart still pounding in her chest. She had chosen. She had chosen to stand with him, to defy everything she had been taught, and in doing so, she had found something she never expected: hope. Victor met her gaze, a small, but genuine smile crossing his face. "We made it," he said, his voice filled with relief. For the first time, the assassin allowed herself to smile back. It was a small smile, but it meant everything. But there was no time for celebration. The room was still filled with the distant sounds of enemies, and they knew they had only a few minutes before reinforcements arrived. The mission wasn't over, but they had made it through the worst of it. Where do we go from here? She asked, her voice steady, though her mind was still racing. Victor looked at her, his eyes full of determination. We fight for what's right, and we get out of here. The two of them moved toward the exit side by side, ready to face whatever came next. The assassin had made her choice, and in doing so, she had found a new purpose. She was no longer just the killer they had trained her to be. She was something else now, something stronger, something more human. As they stepped into the unknown, the assassin knew one thing for sure. Her life would never be the same again. The line between enemies and allies had blurred, but in that blurring she had discovered her true self, and that was all that mattered now.